The scars on Leora's back burned every time it rained. They twisted like jagged rivers across her shoulder blades, remnants of the accident that had stolen her mother and left her with what the doctors called a miraculous survival. But Leora didn't feel miraculous. She felt like a fractured vase glued haphazardly back together, functional, but forever marked by the breaks. The townsfolk of Hollow's End called her the girl with wings, not because she could fly, but because the scars fanned out like phantom limbs when she moved. Children whispered that she'd fallen from the sky. Elders said she carried a curse. Leora ignored them all. She spent her days tending her mother's overgrown garden, pruning roses that bloomed black at the edges, and her nights listening to the wind howl through the canyon behind their crumbling cottage. But one evening, the wind spoke back. It happened as she knelt in the dirt, digging up potatoes with hands still raw from scrubbing hospital floors. A sound like a hum woven from starlight drifted through the air. "Look up," it seemed to say. Leora froze. The voice was neither male nor female, but ancient, like the creak of old trees. When she turned, a flicker of gold darted into the woods. Against her better judgment, she followed. The forest swallowed her whole. Brambles clawed at her ankles, and the trees leaned close, their bark etched with symbols she couldn't decipher. Deeper she wandered, until the moonlight faded, and the only light came from her. A woman stood in a clearing, her skin glowing faintly, as if lit from within. She wore a cloak stitched from autumn leaves, and her hair cascaded like liquid silver. But it was her eyes that arrested Leora, pools of amber swirling with galaxies. "You've been listening to the wrong voices, child," the woman said, her tone both gentle and unyielding. "The ones in your head, the ones in the town, they drown out the light." "What light?" Leora snapped, her voice trembling. "There's nothing left." The woman smiled, and the scars on Leora's back pulsed softly, as if answering. "You've carried it all this time. Broken wings don't mean broken flight." Before Leora could protest, the woman pressed a hand to her chest. Heat bloomed beneath her ribs, and suddenly she was seeing, not with her eyes, but with something deeper. Memories flashed. Her mother's laughter as they danced in the garden, the scent of jasmine tea, the way the sunlight had fractured through the car window moments before the crash. And beneath it all, a thread of gold, delicate but unbroken. "Pain is a language," the woman murmured, "but so is hope. Yours has been whispering. Will you finally listen?" Weeks passed. Leora returned to the woods nightly, learning to quiet the storm inside her. The woman who called herself Ilara taught her to trace the scars with her fingertips and feel rather than flinch. "They're not wounds," Ilara insisted. "They're maps. Each crack holds a story of survival." One moonless night, Ilara led her to a hidden spring. The water glowed faintly, alive with bioluminescent algae. "The first step to mending," she said, "is to stop fearing what's broken." Leora hesitated, then peeled off her threadbare shirt. The scars glared back at her in the water's reflection, ugly, twisted things. But as she waded into the spring, the algae swirled around her, clinging to her skin like liquid stars. The burning in her back cooled, replaced by a tingling warmth. "Now breathe," Ilara instructed. "Breathe into the places you've sealed shut." Leora inhaled, and for the first time in years, her lungs didn't hitch. The algae pulsed brighter, and the scars shifted. Not healing, but transforming. Feather-light patterns emerged, etched in gold, tracing the old wounds into something resembling wings. "What's happening to me?" Leora gasped. Ilara's gaze softened. "You're remembering what you are." The truth came in fragments, Elara spoke of the Luminara, beings born from stardust, meant to carry light to fractured places. But sometimes, she said, the weight of the world breaks even us. We fall, we forget, and the light goes quiet. Leora's mother, Elara revealed, had been one of them. She gave her light to save you that day on the road. You were meant to die. She rewrote the story. Anger surged in Leora. So I'm just some cosmic accident. No, Elara said firmly. You're a bridge, a human heart with a Luminara soul. The scars are where your mother's light fused with yours. But you've been treating them like chains. That night, Leora dreamt of her mother. They stood in the garden, but the roses were no longer black. They blazed crimson, and her mother's voice echoed. The light isn't in spite of the breaks, Leora. It's because of them. The townsfolk noticed the change. Leora stopped hunching to hide her scars. She let her hair grow wild, and when children pointed, she smiled and told them stories of stars that chose to walk the earth. Slowly, the whispers shifted from fear to curiosity. But the true test came when a boy from the village fell into the canyon. His parents screamed as rescuers declared the cliffs too unstable to climb. Leora felt the pull before she understood it, a hum in her scars, urgent and magnetic. She ran, not away, but toward the edge where the boy clung to a jagged outcrop. The crowd shouted for her to stop, but the world narrowed to the golden thread in her chest, throbbing like a second heartbeat. Without thinking, she leapt. Wind roared in her ears. For one terrifying second, she plummeted. Then the scars on her back blazed. Golden light erupted, not as wings, but as a radiant lattice that slowed her fall like a parachute of threads. She grabbed the boy, and the light lifted them both, gentle as a sign back to solid ground. When they landed, the lattice faded, but the crowd had seen. They knelt, some weeping, others reaching to touch her hands. Leora trembled, not from fear, but awe. The scars no longer burned. They sang. Elara found her at dawn, sitting by the spring. You've ignited the light, she said. It will never be quiet again. Leora stared at her hand, still glowing faintly. What do I do now? What you've always done. Tend the garden, mend what's broken. But this time, Elara placed a seed in her palm, a tiny, luminous thing, planted where the pain runs deepest. Leora returned home and buried the seed beside her mother's roses. By morning, a sapling had sprouted, its bark shimmering with veins of gold. When she touched it, warmth spread through her, and the whispers returned, not of wind, but of her mother's voice, woven into the leaves. You are the light, it said, and the light cannot be broken. Years later, travelers would speak of Hollow's End as the village where the trees hummed and the flowers glowed after dark. They'd tell of a woman with scars like gilded wings who could heal wounds with a touch and whose laughter made the stars seem dim. But Leora knew the truth. The real miracle wasn't the light. It was learning that even the deepest cracks could become windows, and that sometimes to fly, you first had to fall.